The second session today is focused on developing innovative workforce solutions. And this second webinar is part of a 4-webinar series that's supporting the hospital-only discharge collaborative that we've developed within ESIST. We've got a couple of objectives in terms of this particular work stream, and we're kind of very conscious of the pressures that that organisations face in terms of their workforce. So we're kind of very keen to measure, evaluate and understand what those are, and to help you focus on doing that yourselves. We also want to use these webinars to support you to develop workforce solutions, and also look at recruitment strategies, and also to develop a workforce support package. So as we move through the webinars, what we want to do is help you develop a strategy that's going to not only identify what your workforce needs are, but also support you in terms of developing recruitment strategies and moving through to helping you to not only recruit your workforce, but also to retain it. This, as I said, is the second of 4 webinars, and we've got 2 further ones. I believe the next one is in August, and then there'll be a final one that will focus on retaining your workforce, and that's scheduled for September. As part of our offer in terms of the workforce work stream, there are some various resources which are on the ESIS YouTube channel, and also on the Future site under the section that's focusing on the hospital only discharge, and you'll see that there's a section there focused on the ESIST Academy, and there'll be lots of resources in there. In addition to that, we are able to offer some bespoke support to you as organisations, and that can be accessed by contacting any of us from the ESIST team. So on to today's session. Today's session is going to be delivered by one of our ESIS clinical associates, Rob Pinate, and Rob is a consultant nurse in the emergency department at UCLH. Following Rob's presentation, we're going to have a Q&A session, and following that, and the link will be hopefully placed in the chat box, we'd ask you to feedback on the session. So without further ado, I shall stop sharing my screen and hand over to Rob.
Thanks, Vince. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see my presentation. I'll put it up into presenter mode. Bear with me 1 second. It wants to work. So, no matter how many times you rehearse this sort of stuff, when it actually comes to it, it doesn't work, does it? Apologies, guys. Bear with me. Slight IT failure. Okay. Right, let's try that once more. Otherwise, I'm going to plead to a colleague to do it for me. Okay, I presume you can see the slides in full now. Can someone just let me know?
Yeah, we can see.
Lovely, great stuff. All right, good afternoon. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Vince. The other thing I would add is we want to know a bit about you guys. So whilst I'm talking, feel free to put a little bit about you guys and what you're looking towards in terms of this session, but also the workforce stream in total. And please feel free to post some questions in the chat. We will absolutely have some time at the end. I absolutely don't want to talk to you guys, just me talking for the next 50 odd minutes. Very much want to hear from you guys, because this session is kind of supposed to give you some ideas, perhaps spark ideas, spark some interest in terms of thinking, is there a different way that I can think about how I can develop my workforce? And it really follows on from the first session. So if you haven't seen the first session, please do go onto our YouTube channel, because the first session, colleagues of ours, Richard and Chris, gave an overview of workforce in terms of thinking about the key aspects of workforce, but also some demand and capacity tools. And actually, this kind of follows on from that and starts to drill down into a bit of detail. I'm also conscious that I'm actually going to inevitably talk about stuff which actually crosses over the next two sessions. So thinking about what is your offer, what can you offer, but also thinking about retention as much as we think about recruitment. So hopefully I'm no more than half an hour, because I really do want to leave time for questions at the end. I can't see hands, by the way, so my colleagues will keep an eye, but feel free to post questions in the chat. So what I just really want to do is give you some ideas, spark some debate, perhaps, in terms of thinking about improvement in nursing and AHP roles. And as a nurse, I am blatantly going to focus on the nurses and the allied health professionals in terms of their career progression in particular, and how that in and of itself is an important part of driving improvement and improving your workforce. I am going to set out some key cornerstones. You can see that on the slide there. I'll come to that in just a second. But then we're actually going to go through some tools that I've developed and that we've developed within eSyst in terms of thinking about how you can then bring that into your ward, your acute assessment unit, your acute medical unit, your SDEC, whatever part of the system you work in terms of the urgent emergency care. And then think a little bit about the priorities. So key cornerstones, I guess I'm trying to talk here about thinking about, from a workforce and quality improvement perspective, we often think about recruitment, retention. Obviously, we want to improve quality and safety for us, for our patients. And for me, the top half of this pie, as it were, is the bit that often, not always, but can be missed or can be underdeveloped, certainly. So this is the bit I'm really going to focus on, because I'm a firm believer, not surprisingly, given that I'm giving this session, that if we educate our staff and if we also support them to achieve clinical competence and measure that for them, and also obviously we want them to go beyond just being competent, we want them to be excellent, that in and of itself will have a huge influence on these other factors, the quality, the safety, the recruitment and retention. So it's a virtuous circle, not a vicious circle, it's a virtuous circle. So I'm really going to focus on the top half. And like I said before, the first session kind of gave this overview. So if you haven't seen it, watch that. And you guys will all be familiar with the Safer Nursing Care tool. And there are different tools depending on the kind of area that you work in. I mean, I'm an ED nurse, A&E nurse born and bred, but I'm absolutely going to try and focus this on areas beyond. And I've done a fair bit of work actually with colleagues on acute medicine, both in the trust I'm in now, but also in previous trusts that I was in, King's. So thinking about beyond the ED and how we can support those staff. So that's what I'm focusing on here. So Safer Nursing Care tool does provide tools for wards, but also for acute assessment units. So that can start to give you that baseline data in terms of the workforce, thinking about demand and capacity, which we can provide expertise and tools on. You won't be surprised, I would invite you also to think, when you're thinking about your workforce, then you guys will be like, well, of course we do this, Rob. We already have an educator, a PDN, a practice development nurse, a clinical practice facilitator. I think my only takeaway from that is, having spent time in various trusts, actually what I often find is that for the acute medical wards, and they can be numerous depending on the size of your organisation, and that includes SDEC, and that includes AMU, and that includes ambulatory care. Actually, there often is a paucity of educational roles to support those staff. If you actually think about the numbers of staff across multiple areas, geographically split, actually there's often a paucity of educational roles to support them. So I think it'd be good to hear from you guys about that, but also I always say it's a really important part of your workforce review. We will go a little bit into uplift and headroom because it is an important part of the whole equation, because actually we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're planning in terms of education and development, that it's actually reasonable, that it's deliverable. So we know that uplift should cover annual leave, of course, and sickness, but also it should actually cover study leave, and I will talk a little bit about that. And there is a proxy marker in terms of what sort of percentage are we talking about here. So, of course, as a baseline, you need to know your sickness rates, your study leave rates, your turnover, your vacancy rates, and some of these figures you'll have immediately to hand. But it's a great thing to do and to be really clear about at the beginning of a process where you're looking to improve, to see if, obviously, if you're seeing any improvement. I would contend that this kind of work, because I've seen it for myself, actually makes an impact on your recruitment. It drives down sickness and certainly drives down your turnover, improves your retention. So this is kind of a stepwise approach to education development, or career development, if you like. I think that's probably a better descriptor here. And you won't be surprised, at the top I've said arguably the biggest factor. I've seen it make an enormous impact on those sorts of things. Having done this in my own departments that I've worked in before, and also supported other organisations by virtue of working with ESIS for the last 2 and a bit years, and I work with ESIS 3 days a week, so I spend a lot of time with colleagues around the country doing this work. This stepwise approach seems to work really well. You don't have to follow it, you can do it differently, but it's just a tool. It's just a suggestion. So there's something around doing it in 3 steps, and I will take you through these steps in more detail. But think about a career development program. What does that mean? Does that just mean, well, that's a slew of courses which nurses and HCAs and AHPs get an opportunity to do? Yes, but it's much more detailed than that. It's actually thinking about what each individual might get through their career development and progression in my unit, my ward, and in my division. So thinking about it in those terms, because if you do that first and you can quantify that, that then informs your training needs analysis or your learning needs analysis. And I know that the terms are interchangeable. So the reason why that's really important is because if you've not done your career development program first, then actually your training needs analysis and learning needs analysis is going to be skewed. Often people, understandably, we do TNAs and we actually think about, well, what's available and what can I deliver? I'm going to challenge that and flip it on its head and say, don't think of it like that. Think of it like, what do I need to develop to deliver this career development program? And it might seem extraordinary, but actually think about that. If I could just remind people to go on mute, please, that would be really great. I think someone's not on mute. If you could just check, that would be really appreciated. And the final step is the education costings, because obviously these things cost money. So we need to think about that, and we certainly need to quantify it. Most of the time, it's not as big a number as you would expect. Okay, so let's go through the 3-step approach. Before you even start on a development program, I think the competence in clinical practice is the key bit. And there's loads of competencies out there, I know. I'm going to try and focus in on acute medicine as an example, because I've got some experience in it, but also often a lot of our UEC work goes from the front door of an acute trust and flows into acute medicine, and also beyond. Of course, it goes into surgery, orthopedics, and gynae. I appreciate that, but I'm going to use acute medicine as an example. So there was this publication in 2016 by Casey and colleagues from the Republic of Ireland. And it does what it says on the tin. It's a development framework for supporting nursing practice skills in acute medical assessment units and medical assessment units. And it's a big document. So please do have a look at it. It's a big document, but it's because it talks about how they developed and the rationale behind it. So there's a lot around the development of the framework, not just the framework itself. But if you go towards the end, you'll actually get the framework itself. So this is an example of the framework that they've developed. So this is area 1, and this is systematic assessment. So if you work and if your staff work in SDEC or ambulatory emergency care or an acute medical unit, you will receive patients from the emergency department, yes, but you'll also receive patients. You may already have set up that paramedic direct into those units, certainly GP referrals direct into those units, etc. So actually you would expect your staff to have some skills in systematic assessment of patients that have not necessarily gone through a system within your hospital. So a lot of this is self-explanatory. What I like about their structure is that they've gone for core, specialist and advanced. So they've kind of broken it down to 3 tiers. And core is kind of your band 5, band 6 staff nurse type grade. So you wouldn't expect those individuals to do everything on this page. And actually through the document, it actually starts to show you how you can tailor it. But you may expect the specialist individual, so slightly higher grade, slightly more experienced, to do more of this. And then obviously advanced really lends itself towards advanced clinical practice. And of course, we now have an acute medicine advanced clinical practitioner curriculum, which was published just a few weeks ago by the Society for Acute Medicine. So I just quite like it. This is just one example. There's cardiology, there's respiratory, there's neuro, there's I think there's an older person assessment, which I think is a really nice tool as well in terms of setting out actually what we want our staff to be able to achieve. There was also this publication, actually preceded it in 2013 by Myers and Lees. I've desperately tried to find this. It's referred to in so many documents, but I can't actually find the original document. So I just wanted to put it on the screen anyway in terms of a reference, because some of you may have it or may know it, but it must be out there somewhere. I just couldn't find it, unfortunately, through the powers of Google. So some of you may have access to it, but again, it sounds like a really good framework in terms of thinking about registered nurses in acute medicine. One of the authors actually is one of our colleagues at ESIST. So Liz was Liz Lees, now Liz Lees Deutsch. She published a paper in 2019 actually, and this is how she took that work and then translated it into actual clinical environment. So she's a consultant nurse, or was at the time a consultant nurse in acute medicine at Birmingham Heartlands. I think now she works at Coventry. I hope I've got that right. But this is a good paper because it talks about that translation. You get all these frameworks, and actually part of the challenge is how do I bring that in and translate that into my ward or environment. So it's a good paper to have a look at. The final bit that I just wanted to highlight is trauma, which you may think, well, hang on a minute, you're talking about acute medicine, but and just a full disclosure, I was the founding chair of the National Major Trauma Nursing Group, so I know this work really well. But part of the work that group did is actually set up competencies for ward level nurses where trauma patients are cared for. And actually what we know from the national data is a lot of our trauma work, particularly in trauma units, actually resides within medical wards, not what you would expect in terms of surgical orthopedic wards. Actually, they're in medical wards. A lot of them are the older patient who may have chest, spinal injuries that don't require immediate operative intervention, but that's where they are cared for, and certainly care of the older person wards. There's now a national requirement that there are nurses that are trained and are competent to provide care to these patients. So it's not just a nice to do, it's actually a part of the quality indicators for trauma units and major trauma centres. So your ward may be, or your environment may be one of those that receives trauma patients. You don't have to do all of the competencies. The whole idea is it's a suite of competencies, and you will pick the bits which you think is relevant to your ward. So if you do receive patients with thoracic injuries, just rib fractures, if you do receive patients with spinal injuries that don't require immediate transfer, but you look after them, those are the competencies that you focus on for your staff. And actually, it's now a national requirement since last year. So that just gives you a sense of how many competency frameworks are out there. And I'm not going to say that any one is better than the other. It's just give you an idea that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already out there. It already exists. The reason why I talk about competencies first is because they will then tie into your career development program. So this is a tool that we've created. I created a few years ago, actually, when I was a consultant nurse at King's. It's developed over time. I've implemented it at my current organisation, UCLH, and now we use it within eSyst when we're supporting organisations. The whole point of this is it's a Word document. You can tailor it entirely to your environment, but it just gives you a sense and an idea of actually what we're talking about here. So I've taken a lot of stuff out of here because it was ED focused and actually tried to make it a bit more ward focused, but you guys are the experts, not me. So you'll say, oh, Rob, you've missed some bits off, but it's just to give you a sense and an idea. So here is a band 5 nurse, comes to work in your SDEC, your acute medical unit. And what this does is it says, okay, over the next year to 18 months, let's say, for argument's sake, this is the sort of stuff that we will provide. This is how we're going to develop you, educate you towards that point, towards the end where you will be eligible to apply for a band 6. Now that in and of itself often is missing. Actually, when you speak to junior members of staff, they don't know how to progress. They don't understand necessarily what are the milestones I need to achieve in order to actually be ready for a band 6. Rather than it just being purely a time served discussion, it's about actually what have you progressed. And you can see I've detailed here in-house educational courses, formal, what I've called formal educational courses. There are the competencies. So actually, are they achieving and or developing towards those competencies? And I've included the core and I've included the trauma. And the key thing is actually at the bottom. Because what does this band 5 nurse look like on the ward or in the unit? What are they going to actually deliver? And so you can start to describe, and you can again tailor this obviously to your area, what that band 5 will look like in 12 months, 18 months time, and how that then works into your workforce plan, because this is how we're going to develop the next generation. We follow that on to band 6. And here is another plan for 2 years on this occasion. Again, of course, you can change it depending on what you feel is right for your environment. And again, look at the experience. So we're starting to really build out. This is what a band 6 sister charge nurse will actually be able to do in my department, in my ward, in my area. And you'll see at the top as well, we're thinking about advanced life support training, which might be relevant to your area, and certainly thinking about leadership training, because of course these guys are the ones that hopefully will achieve band 7. In my department, in A&E, you'll see we've used very deliberately the terminology eligible to apply, and that's because our job descriptions now match these frameworks. And we try and stick to them. It's been very difficult during COVID because actually there hasn't been the education available, but it's all coming back online now. So we actually say to our staff, you will not even be shortlisted for a band 5 to a band 6 unless you've achieved this framework. And actually that might sound abhorrent, but actually it really gives people a really clear structure about how to progress in their career. The key is that you can deliver this. So we'll get into that in a second, because there's no point in saying to people you're not eligible to achieve the next level and then you don't even provide it. So that's a very quick run through of a band 5, band 6, and then band 7 structure. So effectively here, you've got 5 years worth of career development or thereabouts. The key is that we can actually deliver this. And that kind of takes us on to the training needs analysis or the learning needs analysis. So I'll come to that in just a second. The other thing I want to just highlight is that actually there are other development programs already out there. It really didn't take me very long at all on Google to find this one. So this is actually on the St George's University Hospital website. I've never worked at St George's. I have taught there, but I've never worked there. So there's no affiliation. It's just the one that came up first. And actually St George's are pretty good. They publish quite a lot. Which is easily findable when you search. So this is a development pathway for band 5 to band 7 in acute medicine. And here it is. And this is the band 5 guide. it's very different looking than mine, of course. In fact, it probably looks nicer, but there are other bits in mine that you might want to translate. It doesn't matter. I think it's just about being clear to your staff that this is what we provide, this is how we're going to develop you, and this is when you're ready. I haven't included them in my slides, but there is one for Band 6 and there is one for Band 7. So that's step one. So we've done the career development program. Really important, in my view, that you do that first, because then you can start to really get into the nitty-gritty detail. So apologies for the basic bog standard Excel spreadsheet on your screen now, but let me just take you through it and why this is an important part of the process in terms of quantifying and ensuring that what we require and what we need isn't outlandish or ridiculous. And in fact, I've yet to come across a department or an organization where I've done this work that has come up with some unachievable aim. So just very quickly, what it does is that first big red arrow, basically it calculates, it adds up how much study leave for all of my staff do I need. And you'll see that this is an emergency department one, but it also includes non-trained. So HCAs and advanced HCAs in this department. So all of the study leave, including StatMand, all of the study leave, that's the total number. Well, if you know the total number of study leave and you know the whole time equivalents in post, then you can calculate the percentage of the establishment which will be required to deliver this, and it's 3.8%. Anything between 3 and 5% is reasonable. And I'll come on to that a bit later about why I say it is reasonable. It's not just me making it up, that there is documents out there that will support that. So in this case, when they did this work, they thought, oh, this is not going to, this is, you know, we're taking this too far. And actually the number it spat out was 3.8%. So it's entirely reasonable. The way they did this, and the way I would invite you to do it, is they then said, this will match the career development program, which is why you have to do that first. And also, not only that, they said, what do we need to deliver the career development program? Bearing in mind, a lot of our staff don't have these courses yet. So there's a deficit, there's a big lag. They did that in this calculation, and actually that's the number it spat out. So let me bring it back to acute medicine wards. This is work that I did in 2016, actually looking ahead to the year 2017-18. So you can see that I was already working on this kind of framework back then. This is when I was working at King's. This is not ED. This is the acute medical unit wards at King's at the time that I worked there. So it's 3 areas, and particularly the first 2, RDL and IZUNT, so the first 2 wards, they're full-sized acute medical unit wards. And again, we used the same rationale and worked through it. So I'm just going to show you all of the stuff that you include, all the core mandatory, life support, all of the university courses which we felt were relevant to that area. And the 2 that they majored on were these 2, because for them, actually, that is where the deficit was. Actually, the deteriorating patient at the time was a challenge in terms of identification. But also they were looking towards developing level 1 beds, so sort of quasi HDU beds, enhanced care beds. So they majored on those 2 courses because they knew that that's where they wanted to head. And then there's all sorts of in-house courses which you guys will be more familiar with than me: tracheostomy training, tissue viability, NIV, and so on and so on. So they calculated the whole lot. And going back to the first slide, their calculation came up as 3.02%. Again, well within reason in terms of a reasonable approach. So I've flown through that rather lengthy Excel spreadsheet. It does take some time, but it's really worthwhile because it quantifies it all. So when you go to your organization and say, right, we want to do this career development program and we need this much time and study leave, etc. Actually, the first question you're going to get asked is, well, can you do that within your envelope? Well, you can if your uplift is sufficient, and I'll cover that in just a second. So step 3 is the costings. Again, this is a real world costings. It is an emergency department, so you will have to cost it based on what you use. I've used here as an example, I've highlighted advanced life support, because some acute units certainly send their staff on not just ILS, but also advanced life support. In this organisation, they did not have to pay their own resource department for course places, but in many organizations you do. So obviously, if that is the case, there's a cross charge, then you actually put a figure in here. Here in this organization, it was 0. But the reason why I'm showing you this is the principle. The principle is actually you've got two different calculations. The one furthest on your right, where it comes up with 14,000, it says at the top in red, to meet standard. So this is the numbers of courses you would need to achieve that career development program you've set out. So if you're saying that everybody band 5 and above should have ILS, which these guys did, this is how many courses we would need just to meet the standard, and it was 62. They needed 62 places in the first year just to meet the standard, as an example. And then the steady state is, okay, so if we just keep going, and these guys actually, they did ILS every year. If we just keep going, what do we need to maintain that? ALS was very different. They needed 15 places to get up to standard, but 5 as an ongoing, because obviously you're going to have new band 6s, new band 7s coming through. But the number it spat out was 14,000. That's peanuts in the grand scheme of things. This is a big emergency department. That is peanuts in the grand scheme of things. And again, just helps people to really quantify and understand what these sorts of things cost. So that's the 3-step approach. Quite a lot of work, but we can provide support in terms of working through this, and it can be absolutely tailored. The whole point of this is that it's not a set in stone approach, and certainly those templates are not set in stone. The whole idea is that they're fully editable and you can tailor them. So the other aspect that I just wanted to highlight is rotational posts. And again, you guys may already have this, or may have had it in the past. I think what I've certainly seen since COVID is that these sorts of things existed and then maybe they've disappeared. I'm a big fan of rotational posts. They can be quite painful to put into place, but I think they have a huge amount of benefit, particularly for newly qualified staff. So often you get, newly qualified or junior band 5 staff. They know they want to work in urgent emergency care in the broader sense, but they don't know which bit of it they want to work in. So actually, can you as an organization craft and tailor some sort of rotational post? It means that they will develop a broad set of skills and knowledge about the organization, actually, by working in different parts of it. And you can actually underpin some of that in terms of the competency and educational progression elements, because if they're going to work in your broad urgent emergency care footprint, it's likely they will need something like immediate life support as an example. So have a think about that and think about where and how we can do it. So here's some real life examples. Again, it took me minutes to find these examples the other day when I was preparing these slides. Guess what? St George's have popped up again. I promise you, I have no other affiliations. I have no affiliations with St George's, but it's because they publicise what they offer really well, which is a whole different discussion about how do you publicise your organisation. It does what it says on the tin. It says to a band 5 thinking of working at St George's, we offer an 18-month rotational programme, 6 months, and you choose the areas you want to work in. So choose 3 areas and we'll rotate you around. Normally at the end of the rotational post, those individuals will have a choice of where they want to go and work. And obviously you could tailor this. I did find another organisation. This was Nottingham. And if we've got colleagues from either of these hospitals on the call, it'd be good to hear from you guys. Again, a bespoke preceptorship plan, so aimed at preceptorship. But again, it's a rotational structure. There's access to acute care skills course. There's protected learning time and supervision, clinical supervision every 8 weeks. So again, that's a really attractive proposition, I would argue, for someone. And actually, hopefully you'll get a really well-rounded and developed individual at the end, which then chooses to work within your acute care footprint. So that was a bit of a rattle through. So apologies, that wasn't a rattle through, but we're going to have time to ask questions and to discuss this. So I guess the key thing for me is what are the priorities, because there's so much in there. Easy for me to say, a rapid review. So I think there's something for me, and we often advise to organisations, you have the expertise in your team. It may be the senior nurse, it may be the departmental or ward lead. It will certainly be your educational colleagues within the department or the ward. Is there a way in which you can give them some time, and I mean really protected time, where they can literally just almost go away and actually plow through all of this work, but it is really worth it. So a rapid review if possible to identify the gaps. Where are you now, but also where do you want to be? That career development program. Certainly exec level discussion about uplift. Uplift varies massively. The recommended by the National Quality Board in 2018 for urgent emergency care is 25%. What I like about that publication, it also says very explicitly that 4.5% of that 25 is for study leave. And that's where I get this principle that somewhere between 3 and 5% is reasonable. And in all the examples that I've developed with organizations or myself in my own units, I've never gone above, I think, 4.2%. So you can absolutely get it within the 4.5% envelope. Think about an education and career development program. Maybe you've already got one. So maybe you guys already have one and you'd like to talk about it in a minute. But a lot of people haven't thought in that broadest sense in terms of that career development. So if you can set it out, develop it, create it, even if you can't deliver it. But this will tell you whether you can deliver it or not. That's kind of the point of the exercises, I guess. Really be clear and set out, this is what we want to do and this is where we want to get to. You can introduce competency frameworks very quickly. Yes, there is a huge challenge with it's all very well introducing them, but then you need people that actually assess individuals against the competencies. I get that. That is a perennial challenge for organizations. And you can, if you've not already introduced ILS as an example, but start to invest in your staff overtly in terms of saying, right, we're really going to try and focus in on your development. Because if I do that, it's highly likely that you guys are going to want to stay. You're going to want to, I invest in you, you're going to want to invest in my ward, department or area. Have a think about rotational posts. Again, you might already have them. I think they've kind of disappeared, not surprisingly, over the last 2.5 years, but maybe it's time that we start thinking about them again and bringing them back. And I guess my broader point is, in my experience, all of the nurses and AHPs that I've worked with and continue to work with, primarily they want to develop themselves and in their careers. And I'm not talking about people that just want to run up to becoming an 8A. I mean, they are all professionals and they just want to develop because they want to develop themselves to provide better care. And I know that people vote with their feet. They don't necessarily just go for the next higher banded job. I know of loads of examples where nurses have chosen to go to somewhere and even take a drop in banding because the opportunities at that other institution, educational, career development, are far superior to what they've got now. So I think that's the environment that I'm always very keen that we develop, and that actually attracts people but also retains people. Final question is the so what question. So I did 3 years of a PhD. I didn't complete my PhD for a variety of reasons, but I learned a hell of a lot even so. So I did 3 years of a PhD. And this is a question my PhD supervisors always ask me, so what? And it's a good question. You know, why would we do this? Well, I think actually I can't sum it up as well as it's already been done for us nationally. So this is directly taken from the NHS Plan 2019. So I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm just going to let you guys read it. I think that pretty much sums it up, and why I'm such a huge flag bearer for this kind of work. And this is written in black and white into the NHS long-term plan from 2019. You have to look for it, and you can see it. It's page 85, but I found it. But I'm really pleased that it's in there. That there's a whole section on developing and investing in your own staff, and this is why it's so important. Final slide. You know, we can talk about workforce in the broadest sense. I think the two key cogs is, of course, your staffing, thinking about what you need, when do you need it, matching your capacity, which is not just your physical space, but could be your workforce, it could be all sorts of things, but workforce is part of it. That's your capacity, and does it meet the demand in terms of patients? But also the skills bit, and I've used the word skills here, but I mean this, everything that I've just talked about, in terms of those two cogs working in unison, because that, in my view, is what then drives the quality, safety and improvement agenda. So thank you. That was a rattle through, but I'm going to stop sharing now and then hand back to Vince, and then any questions or discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. That was really interesting. I think that last slide from the NHS plan really kind of sums that up in terms of you know, why we should offer this career progression, career development, and you know, some of that innovative stuff around. Well, it's not really innovative. You know, it's stuff we kind of know around rotational posts and giving people choice. But I guess in terms of you know, we hear a lot about sort of shortages, you know, across the workforce, not just across the nursing workforce, but across AHPs, across the medical workforce, and organisations. You know, we're all fishing in a kind of, seems to be an ever-decreasing pool, really, and you know, I think there's a lot of talk about, you know, how can we attract, you know, people to our organisation, what's our unique selling point, and I know that we're going to kind of get onto that in one of the future webinars, but it certainly seems that kind of offering some form of structured career path with the development alongside that, with the opportunity to progress in an organisation, if you are, whether you're a newly qualified nurse, AHP, or you're someone that's kind of progressed and are looking around for a fresh challenge. I guess that organisations that can clearly articulate a clear career path and you know, the development to support that are going to kind of be much more successful. So I think it's kind of, I suppose, one of the objectives of running these webinar series was to get sort of participants to kind of think about their workforce strategies, and kind of this certainly is something that kind of really much you know, plays into that. So we're going to open things up for questions now. We are going to be joined to take some of those questions, and also hopefully to stimulate some discussion by another one of our ESIS clinical associates, Dr. Dan Smith. Dan is a respiratory doctor, and previously he was a clinical lead for the hospital at night and lead international doctor recruitment and development, and he's subsequently been the clinical lead for an innovative workforce role that's focused on the medical support worker, and this was in the Midlands region. And Dan has also developed a refugee doctor programme for the region too. So so we've got sort of Dan and Rob that have kind of got a wealth of experience around sort of workforce recruitment and development, and hopefully we'll get a few questions, but perhaps I can hand over to you, Dan. You know, your thoughts on Rob's really interesting presentation.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, and it's always great to listen to Rob, because the work that you've done, Rob, is amazing. And the interesting thing is that, and I always say this, one of the benefits of working for ESIS is that we get the opportunity to go around many different organisations and cherry pick those pieces of good work. And I promise you that on this call, some of what Rob's described, everyone will be doing several elements of it. What the fantastic thing that Rob's done and led is that he's pulled all those elements of best practice into what feels like a really comprehensive programme, so that you've not just got the education, you've got the retention policy, you've got that all that leads to recruitment programs as well. And it's I think it's just that you can almost put all of the work that you've done, Rob, and summarize it all on one slide, and that's why it feels so powerful, rather than these things being kind of disparate. And in the organizations I've been to visit and worked in, to be honest, as well, I can find all that Rob's elements, but I'm not sure I can find them all in one department, and I think that's why it's so powerful. I've tried to use some of what Rob's described in an international doctor recruitment program in Sherwood Forest several years ago, and again, I think the benefit of why we were having 70, 80 applicants a year to that program, and we recruited about 25 to 30 a year, was word of mouth, because we did exactly what Rob said. We had a recruitment plan, we made it as easy as possible. We were doing obviously Skype and Zoom interviews many years ago, before it became as common as we're doing it today. But also we had a retention plan, which include educational development, which include free ALS courses, which include free e-portfolio access and all those kind of things, and uniquely included a study leave budget, which, as you say, Rob, when you invest in people's study leave, it sounds like a lot of money individually, but in the grand scheme of things, to put everyone through an ILS course is peanuts. So yeah, I think really interesting talk, Rob, and I think a lot that we all can kind of take back to our departments to learn from.
Thanks, Dan. So not seeing many questions in the chat box, but if anyone does have any questions for either Dan or Rob, do pop them in the chat box, or just raise your hand. One comment that I've spotted in there is that someone has made a comment around what you've been discussing, Rob, as being helpful in terms of aspirations and motivating staff. Is this sort of a kind of experience that you would recognise?
Yeah, definitely. And I tried to kind of make the point in one of the slides about, people will vote with their feet, and that's not because they're chasing a next band up. In fact, they're probably wanting to go to somewhere where they feel that they're going to have an opportunity to develop. And the example that I gave them, both Dan and Vince have heard this example, is about 6 months ago, I had one of my Band 5 colleagues come up to me and say, Rob, I want to become an ACP. Bearing in mind this individual only relatively recently qualified. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. It takes quite a long time to get to that point. But I think it really highlights that our junior staff, when they qualify, aren't necessarily, thinking, oh, well, I'll just become a staff nurse. And actually, they already have a very clear idea in their head about their trajectory, their career plan. And in my world of expertise in terms of emergency care, you're looking at probably 10-year trajectory to become a credentialed ACP. So actually, I said to them, well, yeah, we can do that, but here's the plan. Because in my department, that plan goes on to nurse practitioner and then goes on to ACP. So actually, we can detail that. And I know I've had staff say to me, well, this is one of the reasons why I came to work at your organisation, is because I knew that you offered these sorts of opportunities and this kind of career progression. So that's really beneficial to us in terms of recruitment, really beneficial in terms of retention. But also, if the vast majority of your staff have been around and continue to develop in your department ward area for many years, that is a critical part of you being able to deliver really high quality care. Not to take anything away from our medical colleagues, Dan, but if you've got a core that don't rotate every 4 months, then we can maintain the care that we can deliver. It makes a huge difference to actually the care that we can deliver. And actually it makes it a better learning environment, I would argue, for our junior doctors as well.
I would completely echo that, Rob. And the other thing is about that kind of shared knowledge hub that you develop from that non-rotational workforce, and bringing it back to doctors, because obviously we're the most important people in the world. When I was running the international graduate program, our teaching sessions, we ensured, were led by fellow international doctors, because it was only those that were able to completely put themselves in the shoes of international doctors. And just like as you described with your Band 5 nurse, junior doctors in this country, either if you're UK trained or not, were not taught about career progression. I had a junior doctor who'd been a doctor for 9 or 10 months the other day asked me what an SHO was. I know it's not a language we should be using anymore, but it's just not terminology that they ever kind of get picked up at medical school. And so if you can imagine, I know, as Vince said, we're all fishing in the same pool, but if you're recruiting from abroad, international doctors have got absolutely no idea about British career progression and training and things, and therefore if you can advertise that you'll support people in career progression before you bring them in and back them and help them get into a training position if you're a doctor, or help them as a nurse with internal training, it's a massive advantage in terms of your recruitment. And we as a DGH in North Nottinghamshire, in a really deprived area, we're taking a lot more international doctors because of our offering of educational support than a trust of our size should have been taking, really.
Thanks, Dan. Not seeing any hands up at the moment. So just picking up on a point from your presentation, Rob, I mean, you highlighted the importance of carving out dedicated time in terms of being able to identify the workforce needs, and also the importance of executive support. And clearly, you know, those are two things that are quite crucial. But in terms of, we know we never make things easy for ourselves in the NHS, and you know, we very often tie ourselves up in knots, particularly around recruitment. And you know, I think as Dan's just mentioned, you know, doctors do rotate fairly regularly. Probably rotational posts are you know, something that maybe AHP colleagues are probably more familiar with. In kind of terms of nursing, sometimes that's, you know, and I speak as a nurse myself, sometimes, you know, we've never really seen that as a sort of as a career, you know, a way of sort of developing careers. It's almost like you're kind of asked to choose right at the inception when you're a newly qualified nurse, and that's it. I'm just going to be a cardiac nurse, or a respiratory nurse, or an ED nurse for the rest of my career. But it's not easy to put these things in place, and you know, and I speak from experience of trying to sort of set up rotational posts in the past. What are the challenges really around sort of, you know, not just setting up rotational posts, but just that challenges in sort of developing a comprehensive pathway like the one you described, and the one that, you know, the example you gave us from St George's?
Yeah, I think that it's protecting the individual. So the vast majority of the time, the right people already, the expertise already exists within your department or your division, but we're all in danger of always being on the hamster wheel, right? So we actually don't get much time to do the bigger stuff, step away from the shop floor, as it were, the coal face, and actually say, right, strategically, how am I going to develop something like I've talked about? People need a bit of time to be able to do that. They need a bit of headspace to be able to do that. I mean, we're fortunate in a way with ESIS because we kind of work with colleagues and say, right, we've got, so myself and Richard Brown, who's obviously part of this work as well, we've done this sort of work with organisations. We've done it on Teams, but we've set aside 2-hour meetings. With one organisation, we did the whole thing all on Teams, and we had 2-hour block meetings every other week, just for a period of time. And actually, because those two matrons were protected and supported to attend those meetings, come what may, however bad the department was, they were always there. Then we were really able to work through this work, and we did all of the demand and capacity stuff as well at the same time, and come up with the whole suite. So then you've got the workforce piece and the education competency development piece. So I get it, it's not easy. And when Rome is burning, it's very difficult to walk away from that, particularly if you're a senior person, and actually spend time. So I think time's a key part. And very quickly, in terms of rotational posts, I think at King's, we wanted rotational posts, ED, critical care, and acute medicine. So we ensured we all had some rotational band 5 vacancies. We created them as people turned over. We said, right, we'll hold these. So I think we all had 3 or 4. And so we all recruited into them, and we knew that they would all rotate at the same time. So none of us were ever down on band 5s. But that does take a little bit of work in terms of bringing those 3 departments or wards or areas together and saying, right, this is what we're going to do. But well worth it. That the rewards are more than paid back in terms of the time that people need to be protected for.
Thanks, Rob. So we're just coming to the close now, but I see we've got a question from Claire.
Hi, Vince, thanks. It was just really to just vouch for what Rob's just said, actually, because I think I may have worked with one of the trusts that he's referring to. And it was a bit of a sort of stop-start piece of work to begin with, until we got the exec team to actually support them, to give them the time to do it, because we couldn't progress any of the improvement work until they'd actually perhaps addressed this a little bit. So it was just to vouch that it is a really useful tool to give the senior nursing team to sort of get that message across to their execs for support for development.
Thanks, Claire. Dan?
I know we're coming towards the end of this fantastic webinar, Rob and Vince, so thank you very much, Vince, for chairing and Rob for presenting. I just wanted to take 30 seconds just to thank Vince. I'm not sure if everyone knows on the call, but you might not know because Vince only looks about 24 years of age, but Vince is retiring and he's been a really key, I was going to say resource, that sounds awful, but a really key part of this workforce work stream that we're doing as part of the hospital and discharge programme. And Vince has helped us to plan the next couple of webinars as well. So even Vince, when you're leaving and retiring and sunning it up for the next 6 months on your grand holiday plans, all of your hard work will not be forgotten. So just a quick moment before we leave to say thank you very much, Vince, for all your hard work. It's been a pleasure working with you for the last few years.
Thanks, Dan. I hate this. I find this really embarrassing.
Good, perfect.
Good, that's good. Well, we've actually got a hand up, Vince, so there you go. You've got a get out. Barbara, have you got a question for us?
Yes, I do. Just saved from the embarrassment in there. So as a nurse myself and a lecturer, what I've noticed is that some of the students from certain universities seem to have a much better understanding about their clinical progression or their progression in their careers, even if it's not from a clinical perspective, where others not so much. Is there anything that you know of that is being done nationally, or that we could, I mean, I can think about a few things that we could do, but is there anything in motion to try and possibly support these students as well from different universities to have a better idea of their capabilities and how the nursing career doesn't have to mean that, I mean, if they want to stay as band 5s, then fair enough, but if they don't want to and they want to progress, that there is a lot of progression out there.
Oh, that's a big question. I think the onus is on the organisations. That are we talking about pre-reg or post-reg students?
I'm specifically talking about pre-reg. They are, you know, in their last year of nursing, and therefore they're about to be registered.
Oh yeah. So I think it's important as organisations or as wards or as departments that take final year students that we do provide that kind of information, because we're probably best placed as an acute trust to say, well, look, if your career is acute trust, this is kind of what we can provide. I don't have personal experience of this, but I'm pretty sure my educational nurses, when they're inducting students into A&E, I think our guys come in their second year of pre-reg, that they do talk about, actually, this is what a career in emergency nursing looks like, because obviously we can talk about that. And I think that's a key part of it. I think it is important that we use those opportunities, and obviously final year pre-reg nurses obviously are doing sort of that management placement type placement towards the end. That's the kind of perfect opportunity to say, well, look, you're going to be let loose as a registrant in 6 months' time. This is the sort of stuff that you can think about. So I think it's a bit of collaborative work as well. I've spoken in universities as a visiting lecturer about careers in emergency nursing up to, you know, my level, but there's a slew of people that could go and do that. So I think the way that we work together as well as acute trusts and higher education institutions is really important.
I think it's something that's possibly worth feeding back as well, Barbara, if you're finding it from certain organisations it's weaker, is to the local HCE team. I know that Health Education England pre-pandemic were running the repair programme for nursing staff, and one of the themes for that was why people were leaving the profession straight after registration was because of a lack of understanding of career development. I know they had, it's a long time ago since pre-pandemic now in my world, but I know they had some ideas about going into medical school, just medical schools. So I'm saying back to doctors,
Yes.
Going into nursing schools and have a look at how they could improve the understanding of career development and things. So there's a few case studies I remember that HC presented and shared about that. But yeah, maybe worth working with the local team.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Big thanks to Rob for the presentation today. I hope that's been useful for everyone on the call. I popped in the chat box the link to the feedback form. It really helps us in terms of developing the content of the webinar, and it will help us certainly develop future collaboratives if people could complete those. Thank you all for joining us today. Just pass over to Dan just to round things off. Dan, are you able to just kind of share what webinar 3 is going to be about?
Yeah, so we've got our next webinar. It's 2 weeks today, if my maths are correct, on the first Thursday of August. As you can notice, a theme in these webinars so far. The first one was about kind of trying to stimulate ideas about what workforce we needed. Today was about how to develop that innovative workforce model, ACPs. I've talked about doctors as well. And the next one is about actually how you recruit those doctors. So some hints and tips from colleagues, both doctors and nurses, who have run innovative, we use that word a lot, don't we, innovative recruitment strategies, and also about developing a USP for your department or your hospital. So that's the next one on the 4th of August. And the very last thing we'd like to ask everyone on the call is if you have any case studies or you'd like to actually do some of the presentations for us, we'd really like to hear from you. So if you can drop either myself or Vince, before he disappears on his long holiday, an email, we'd love to hear from any examples of best practice from your organisations for our last webinar on the 22nd of September. So a little plug there from me. Thanks, Vince.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.